The white ships of Earth moved slowly through the busy space lanes of the Galactic Assembly. They were small compared to the massive warships of older species. Their hulls carried no weapons that anyone could see. Their crews smiled at every insult and bowed at every demand. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Olive Branch and watched the stars pass by. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes. In 32 years of service, no one had ever seen him lose his temper. Some said he had no temper to lose. Others said he simply chose not to show it. Humanity had joined the Galactic Assembly 3 decades ago. They came with open hands and hopeful hearts. They asked for nothing but a seat at the table and a chance to learn. The older species laughed at them. The humans were young, primitive, and far too trusting for the harsh reality of galactic politics. But they were useful. Humans worked hard. They followed rules. They paid their taxes on time and never complained about unfair trade agreements. When larger empires demanded tribute from smaller species, humans quietly paid on behalf of those who could not afford it. When conflicts arose, humans offered to mediate. They asked for peace when others reached for weapons. Ambassador was the face of Earth in the assembly. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice. She had spent 20 years learning the customs of 100 different species. She knew when to speak and when to stay silent. She knew how to smile through insults that would make others reach for a knife. At a reception she stood near the food tables and listened to the conversations around her. There were tall, blue-skinned beings with 4 arms and too much pride. Their ambassador was speaking loudly to a group of officials from other species. "The humans are like trained pets," he said, and the group laughed. "Watch how they fetch and carry for anyone who asks. They are desperate to please. It is almost sad." Captain Bay stood beside Ambassador. She was young, barely 30, with the idealism of someone who still believed in the mission. Her hands tightened into fists at the ambassador's words. "How do you tolerate it?" she whispered. Ambassador continued smiling at nothing in particular. "Patience," she replied quietly. "We are building something. They will understand eventually." "And if they never understand?" The ambassador's smile did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Then they will learn another way." On the Olive Branch, Admiral Park reviewed the daily reports from Earth's 12 diplomatic ships. They were spread across the galaxy, carrying messages of peace and offers of friendship. Most of those offers were ignored. Some were answered with mockery. A few were met with genuine interest from species who recognized something familiar in humanity's approach. The collective had demanded payment from 3 small species on the edge of their territory. The payment was impossible for them to meet. Failure would mean the destruction of their trading fleets and economic ruin for their people. Earth paid on their behalf, quietly, without announcement or expectation of thanks. "Why do we do this?" a young officer asked Admiral Park. "They do not even know it was us." The admiral looked at the stars "Because it is right," he said simply. "Because someone must show that kindness still exists in this galaxy, and because they will remember even if they do not know who to thank." The officer did not fully understand, but he trusted his admiral, as all of them did. Director Han ran Earth's intelligence division from a bunker deep beneath Geneva. She was not a diplomat. She did not smile at insults or bow to demands. Her job was to watch, to listen, and to prepare for the day when smiles would no longer be enough. On her screens, she tracked the movements of every major fleet in the galaxy. She studied the weaknesses of every empire that had ever threatened Earth. She maintained files on military leaders, political figures, and the hidden secrets that powerful beings thought no one could find. Her analysts worked in silence, gathering information that Earth's diplomats would never mention: the locations of fuel depots, the rotation schedules of defense platforms, the communication codes that militaries thought were unbreakable. "We are diplomats," the official policy stated. "We seek only peace." Director Han knew that peace sometimes required preparation for war. On 442b, the largest human colony outside the solar system, life continued as normal. 2.3 million people lived in cities built across 3 continents. Farmers grew crops that fed a dozen other colonies. Children went to school. Parents went to work. Old people sat in parks and complained that young people had no respect anymore. It was a beautiful world. Blue skies, green fields, oceans that sparkled under twin suns. Dr. Shin was the medical officer at Central Hospital in the capital city. She had moved to 12 years ago to escape the crowded cities of Earth. Here, she could breathe. Here, she could heal people without drowning in paperwork and politics. She was finishing her evening rounds when the first alarms began to sound. Emergency signals echoed through the hospital corridors. Patients looked up in confusion. Nurses rushed to windows. The sky was wrong. The beautiful blue sky was filling with dark shapes. Ships, hundreds of ships, ships that did not match any design in the colony's database. Dr. Shin's communicator crackled with static. A voice broke through, desperate and afraid. "This is colony defense. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under." The transmission cut off. The sky began to burn. On the Olive Branch, thousands of light years away, Admiral Park received a priority signal, a distress call from 442b. The colony was screaming for help. Then the signal stopped. The Admiral's calm expression did not change, but his hands gripped the edge of his command console so hard that his knuckles turned white. "Set course for," he ordered quietly, "maximum speed." The white ships of Earth turned toward home. They did not know what they would find, but somewhere deep inside, Admiral Park already understood that everything was about to change. The Olive Branch dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Admiral Park stood at the and said nothing. Around him, his crew stared in silence at what remained of their colony. 442b was burning. From orbit, they could see the craters where cities had stood. The beautiful blue oceans were gray with ash. The green fields were black and smoking. The twin suns shone down on a world that was no longer alive. "Search for survivors," Admiral Park ordered. His voice was steady, his hands were not. Lieutenant led the first search and rescue team to the surface. He was a big man with a gentle heart, the kind of soldier who rescued children and carried wounded civilians on his back. He had seen terrible things in his career. He thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. The capital city was gone, not destroyed. Gone. The attackers had used weapons that left nothing behind. Buildings were shadows burned into the ground. Streets were rivers of melted glass. The smell of death hung in the air like a fog that would never lift. "Who did this?" one of his soldiers whispered. The answer came from the colony's damaged database. The Dominion, a species humanity had barely heard of. They lived on the other side of the galaxy and had never shown interest in human space before. But 442b sat at the intersection of 3 major trade routes. The colony's location was strategically inconvenient for expansion plans. Their solution was simple: remove the inconvenience. Remove every man, woman, and child who lived there. Lieutenant found the first survivors on the 3rd day, a family of 4 hiding in a collapsed basement. The mother had shielded her children with her own body when the ceiling fell. She was dead. The children were alive. They could not speak. They could only stare with eyes that had seen too much. By the end of the first week, the rescue teams had found 312 survivors, out of 2.3 million people. Dr. Shin emerged from the ruins of Central Hospital on the 16th day. She was covered in dust and dried blood. Her medical uniform was torn. Her eyes were empty. Behind her, 43 children walked in a silent line. She had hidden them in the hospital basement when the attack began. For 16 days, she had kept them alive in the darkness, rationing water and food, telling them stories to drown out the sounds of death above. She walked to Lieutenant and handed him her medical recorder without saying a word. The recorder contained video from the hospital's security cameras. It showed everything: the soldiers entering the city, the systematic destruction of escape pods as they tried to launch, the targeting of medical facilities first, because wounded survivors could not run as fast as healthy ones. They had not just attacked the colony, they had hunted its people like animals. Lieutenant watched the recording. His gentle face turned hard. The soldier who rescued children now wanted to destroy worlds. On Earth, Director Han gathered the planet's leaders in the command center beneath Geneva. She played the recording on the main screen. No one spoke. Some wept. Some raged. Some simply stared, unable to process what they were seeing. The final count came in after 3 weeks of searching. 847 survivors. 2.3 million dead. Then came the response from the Galactic Assembly. Ambassador read the message to the gathered leaders. Her voice was flat, empty of emotion. The Galactic Assembly acknowledges the unfortunate incident at 442b. The Dominion has agreed to pay reparations of 12,000 credits per deceased colonist. The Dominion considers this matter resolved. The Assembly recommends that the human delegation accept this settlement and resume normal diplomatic activities. 12,000 credits, less than the cost of a used ground vehicle. That was the value the galaxy placed on a human life. The room was silent, not the silence of shock, but the silence of something fundamental breaking. Fleet Admiral Park had arrived on Earth the day before. He had spent 32 years being patient. He had smiled through insults. He had negotiated with species who considered him inferior. He had believed, truly believed, that diplomacy could solve anything. He stood up slowly. Every eye in the room turned to him. He removed the white diplomatic sash from his shoulder and placed it carefully on the table. The sash represented everything he had worked for: peace, understanding, hope. "Call them home," he said quietly. "Call all of our ships home, every diplomat, every ambassador, every trader and scientist and aid worker. Bring them all back to Earth." "Admiral," someone protested, "if we withdraw from the Assembly, we lose everything we have built. 32 years of." 32 years of patience, Park interrupted. His voice was still calm, but something in his eyes had changed. 32 years of good faith, and they answered with the ashes of our children. Ambassador stood beside him. The woman who had smiled through 1,000 insults was not smiling now. "I will send our response to the Assembly," she said. "Then I will close our embassy and return home." "What will you tell them?" Director Han asked. The ambassador's face was cold as stone. "That they have taught us what the galaxy respects, and that we are fast learners." Across the galaxy, human ships began to move. White diplomatic vessels turned away from foreign ports. Embassy staff packed their belongings and boarded transports. Trade delegations canceled their meetings and headed for Earth. Within 3 weeks, there was not a single human in Galactic Assembly space. The other species barely noticed. Humans had never been important anyway. They were quiet, polite, and easy to ignore. Their absence was like the absence of background noise. You only noticed it when you started to wonder why everything seemed so silent. Dr. Shin stayed on the rescue ships until the last survivor was evacuated from. The 43 children she had saved refused to leave her side. They still could not speak. But when she finally slept, they gathered around her like a protective wall, as if they could shield her the way she had shielded them. The Olive Branch was the last ship to leave the system. Admiral Park stood at the and watched the ruined world grow smaller. "We will come back," he said quietly, "and when we do, things will be different." The ship turned toward Earth. Behind it, the ashes of 2 million people drifted on the wind of a world that would never recover. And somewhere in the cold depths of space, The Dominions celebrated their successful expansion with no idea what they had awakened. For 3 months, Earth was silent. The Galactic Assembly sent messages asking when human diplomats would return. There was no reply. Trading partners asked about delayed shipments. There was no reply. Species who had secretly appreciated human kindness sent worried inquiries. There was no reply. Some members of the assembly thought this was amusing. The humans were having a tantrum like children who did not get what they wanted. They would come back eventually. They always did. Humans were too weak to do anything else. Others were less certain. The silence felt wrong, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. On Earth, the silence hit a transformation. 27 orbital shipyards worked day and night. Workers pulled double shifts, then triple shifts. Sleep became a luxury no one could afford. The white paint was stripped from diplomatic vessels, revealing the dark metal beneath. Hull panels that had seemed decorative were removed, and behind them waited weapons that had been installed decades ago. Engineers stood in the main construction bay of Orbital Station 7 and watched the skeleton of a warship take shape. He had not slept in 4 days. His eyes were red and his hands shook from too much coffee, but he could not rest. Not now. The Class Heavy Cruiser, he explained to the construction crews. We designed it 40 years ago, just in case we ever needed it. We hoped we never would. The ship was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful, long and sleek, with lines designed for speed and violence. It carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Its shields could withstand attacks that would tear lesser ships apart. Admiral Park toured the shipyards every week. He asked questions, reviewed progress, and never raised his voice. The calm that had served him in diplomacy now served him in war. "How many can we build?" he asked. The engineer pulled up production schedules on his tablet. In 3 months, 240 heavy cruisers, 800 medium destroyers, 1,500 support vessels, plus the 1,500 ships we already have that were classified as mining and research fleets. The admiral nodded slowly, and the crews. "Already trained," a new voice said. Sergeant Major O stepped forward. She was a small woman with gray-streaked hair and scars that told stories she never shared. For 20 years, she had trained soldiers in camps that did not officially exist. Her graduates worked as security consultants and peacekeeping advisors across human space. "Every one of our diplomatic and commercial ships carried double crews," she explained. "Half were genuine crew, half were military personnel in civilian clothes. When the call came, they shed the disguises." Admiral Park remembered the young officer who had asked why Earth helped those who could not help themselves. This was the other reason. Every act of kindness had also been an act of intelligence gathering. Every trade mission had studied foreign military tactics. Every peace conference had analyzed potential enemies. The galaxy had never asked why human ships were so heavily armored for diplomacy. They had never wondered why Earth maintained such large mining fleets in distant systems. They had never questioned the agricultural research facilities on the Moon or the weather stations hidden in asteroid belts. Humanity had hoped for peace, but they had prepared for war. In the command center beneath Geneva, Director Han coordinated the largest military buildup in human history. Her screens showed troop movements, supply chains, and the positions of every known ship. 32 years of intelligence work was finally being used for its true purpose. They have 218 major warships, she reported to the War Council. Their home fleet consists of 84 of those. They do not expect any threat from human space. Their defensive formations are designed for show, not combat. "And their weaknesses?" Admiral Park asked. Director Han smiled without humor. "Many. Their communication systems use outdated encryption. Their fuel depots are concentrated in predictable locations. Their command structure is rigid and slow to adapt. Most importantly, they are arrogant. They have never fought an enemy who was smarter than them. Ambassador entered the room. She had changed since. The diplomatic smile was gone, replaced by something harder. She carried a tablet with her final message to the Galactic Assembly. "I am ready," she said. The council gathered around the main screen. The message would be broadcast to every assembly species simultaneously. There would be no warning, no negotiation, no chance for them to prepare. Ambassador's face appeared on the screen. Her voice was calm and cold. For 32 years, humanity asked nothing but fairness from this galaxy. We gave our labor, our resources, and our good faith. We mediated conflicts we had no part in. We paid debts we did not owe. We smiled through insults and remained patient when patience seemed foolish. She paused, letting the silence stretch. At 442B, 2.3 million of our people were murdered. Children were hunted through the streets. Hospitals were targeted to maximize suffering. Escape pods were shot down so that no one could witness what happened. Her eyes seemed to look directly through the screen, into the souls of everyone watching. The Galactic Assembly's response was to offer 12,000 credits per life, less than the cost of a used vehicle. This was considered fair. This was considered resolved. She leaned forward slightly. "You have taught us what this galaxy respects. Consider this our graduation." The transmission ended. At the edge of space, 3,000 human warships simultaneously. They appeared from nowhere, filling the darkness with the cold light of weapons charging. The early warning systems screamed alerts that no one had ever expected to hear. Commanders rushed to their posts. Admirals demanded explanations. Panic spread through the chain of command like fire through dry grass. A single transmission broadcast on all frequencies. Admiral Park's voice was as calm as it had always been, but now that calm felt like the surface of a frozen lake hiding deep, dark water beneath. "This is Fleet Admiral Park of the Earth Combined Fleet. We have come to discuss reparations." He paused, and 3,000 ships moved forward in perfect formation. "We suggest you take notes." The Dominion had conquered 11 species in its history. Their military was ancient, experienced, and battle-tested. Their admirals had studied warfare for centuries. Their weapons were feared across half the galaxy. The battle lasted 9 hours. Archon, supreme leader of the Dominion, watched from his command center as his empire crumbled. The screens showed ship after ship being destroyed. Defense platforms that had never fallen were torn apart like paper. Communication lines went silent one by one as relay stations were systematically eliminated. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are farmers, diplomats, merchants. They do not know how to fight." His military advisor stared at the tactical display with growing horror. "They knew," he whispered. "They knew everything, every formation we use, every weakness in our shields, every code we thought was secret. They have been watching us for 32 years and we never noticed." The human fleet moved like a single organism. 3,000 ships working in perfect harmony, every action coordinated to the second. They did not waste ammunition. They did not make mistakes. They hit exactly what they intended to hit and nothing else. Captain Bay commanded the cruiser from the center of the formation. She had been a young officer on the Olive Branch when the first distress call came from. She had seen the ashes of her people scattered across a dead world. Now she was here to make sure it never happened again. "Target the shipyard defense grid," she ordered. "Disable their production capacity. Leave civilian structures untouched." Her weapons officer hesitated. "Captain, if we struck the civilian sectors, we could end this faster. Their people would demand surrender." Turned to look at him. Her face was hard, but her voice was steady. "The murdered are civilians to make a point. We are here to show them a different way. We destroy military targets. We disable their ability to make war. We do not become the monsters they are." The weapons officer nodded and turned back to his console. The guns opened fire on the shipyard and nothing else. Across the fleet, the same discipline held. Human soldiers had spent years preparing for this moment, and they had also spent years learning what they would not do. There would be no revenge massacres, no targeting of hospitals or schools, no hunting civilians through the streets. Justice, not genocide. Admiral Park watched the battle from the bridge of the flagship Soul. His face showed no emotion, but inside he felt something he had not expected: sadness. He had hoped for 32 years that this day would never come. He had believed that patience and kindness could solve anything. He had been wrong. But he would not let that wrongness twist him into something he hated. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "the Home Defense Fleet is requesting terms of surrender." Park nodded slowly. "Tell them their military forces will stand down immediately. All ships will power down weapons and open their hangars for inspection. The architects of the massacre will be surrendered for trial. In exchange, not one civilian will be harmed." "And if they refuse?" The admiral looked at where warships were still trying to organize a defense. They were failing. They had been failing for 9 hours. "Then we continue, until there is no military left to refuse." The Galactic Assembly's response came within hours. 12 species threatened intervention if Earth did not withdraw immediately. They called the attack unprovoked aggression and a violation of galactic law. They demanded that humanity stand down and accept arbitration. Admiral Park read their message and dictated his response. The Galactic Assembly had 32 years to establish laws protecting civilian populations. They chose not to. The Assembly had the opportunity to condemn the massacre and demand justice. They chose to offer 12,000 credits per corpse. The Assembly now threatens intervention to protect those who murdered 2.3 million innocent people. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Intervene." The Assembly did not intervene. Their fleets stayed in their ports. Their warships remained in orbit around there. One by one, the species who had threatened Earth went silent. They watched the destruction of the military and decided that perhaps this was not their fight after all. The home fleet surrendered on the second day. The defense grid around there fell on the third. Human soldiers landed on the surface, not as conquerors, but as enforcers of justice. Archon was captured trying to flee in a private ship. 46 of his officials and military commanders were arrested with him. They were the ones who had planned the attack. They were the ones who had ordered the hunting of civilians. They were the ones who had laughed about removing an inconvenience. Now they sat in cells, waiting for trial. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy. For the first time, every species saw what had really happened at 442b. The security footage, the systematic destruction, the murder of children and the targeting of hospitals, the escape pods shot down one by one. Dr. Shin. She spoke about the 16 days in the basement, the 43 children she had kept alive in the darkness, the sounds of death above their heads, the moment she finally emerged into the light and saw what remained of her world. She did not cry. She had no tears left. Archon tried to justify his actions. The colony was in a strategic location. Its removal was necessary for expansion. The humans should have moved when they were asked. It was their own fault for being stubborn. The human judges listened to his excuses without expression. Then they delivered their verdict. Guilty, all 47 defendants. Guilty of genocide. Guilty of crimes against sapient beings. Guilty of the systematic murder of 2.3 million innocent people. The sentences were carried out swiftly, not with cruelty but with cold efficiency. The architects of would never hurt anyone again. The galaxy watched in silence. For the first time they understood something important about humanity. These people were not pets. They were not pushovers. They were not weak, stupid, or easy to ignore. They were patient, they were kind, they gave everyone a chance to be better. And when that chance was thrown back in their faces, they became something else entirely, something the galaxy had never seen before. Justice, delivered without mercy but also without cruelty. Strength, used to protect rather than to dominate. And most terrifying of all, discipline. The ability to destroy everything and the choice to destroy only what needed destroying. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the Soul as the human fleet prepared to withdraw. They had been in space for 6 weeks. Not one civilian had been harmed. Not one city had been destroyed. They had dismantled a war machine and brought criminals to justice, and now they were leaving. "It is done," Captain Bay said quietly. "What now?" The Admiral looked at the stars. "Now we go home, and we make sure this never happens again." 1 year after the campaign, the Galactic Assembly reconvened. The Great Chamber was filled with representatives from 100 species. They came in all shapes and sizes, from the towering to the small, insect-like more. They had argued and debated in this room for 10,000 years. They had made treaties and declared wars. They had shaped the destiny of the galaxy. But today they were afraid. The human delegation entered through the main doors. Ambassador walked at the front, her steps measured and calm. Behind her came Admiral Park, now a legend whether he wanted to be or not. Dr. Shin followed, representing the survivors of, and Captain Bay stood at the back, her uniform decorated with medals she had earned in battle. The chamber fell silent as they walked to the human section. Every eye watched them. Every breath was held. Ambassador took her place at the speaking platform. The last time she had addressed this body, she had been ignored. The last time they had offered 12,000 credits for each dead child. Things had changed. 1 year ago, she began, humanity from this assembly. We had given 32 years of patience and good faith. We had asked for nothing but fairness. We received genocide. No one interrupted. No one laughed. No one made jokes about trained pets. When we returned, we did not come for revenge. We did not come to conquer. We came for justice. 47 war criminals now answer for their crimes. 2.3 million names are carved in stone on the memorial at New. And the Dominion, stripped of its military power, rebuilds under a new government that has sworn to never repeat the sins of its predecessors. She paused, letting her words sink in. We could have destroyed them entirely. We had the power. Some would say we had the right. We chose differently. That choice is who we are. She lifted a tablet from the podium. The screen displayed a document that would change galactic history. The Memorial Accords, binding protections for civilian populations across all member species, enforceable penalties for genocide, including military intervention, mutual defense obligations for any member species facing extermination. The chamber erupted in whispers. Some species looked interested, others looked terrified, a few looked furious. These are not requests, Ambassador clarified. These are minimum standards for civilized behavior. Earth will enforce these standards, with allies we hope, alone if necessary. Assembly Speaker, an elder statesman from a neutral species, rose to address the chamber. He was old and wise, and he had seen empires rise and fall. He understood power. He also understood that power had shifted. The human proposal is extreme, he said carefully. It would limit the sovereignty of member species. It would create obligations that many are not prepared to meet. Ambassador nodded. Yes, it would. The alternative is a galaxy where the strong can murder the weak without consequence. We have seen that alternative. We buried 2 million examples of it. The vote took 3 hours. Species argued and debated. Alliances shifted. Old friendships were tested. In the end, the Memorial Accords passed unanimously. No one wanted to be the first to say no to humanity. Not anymore. After the session, Speaker approached Admiral Park, who stood quietly at the back of the chamber. The Admiral had not spoken during the proceedings. He had not needed to. "You terrify us now," admitted. His voice was low, meant only for Park's ears. "All of us, even the species who voted yes. They did so because they were afraid of what would happen if they voted no." Admiral Park considered this. His face showed nothing, but his eyes were thoughtful. "Before," he said, 3 species offered condolences when they heard what happened. 12 species offered genuine help with rescue efforts. They sent ships and medical supplies and volunteers who worked alongside our people in the ruins." Nodded slowly. 17 species refused to even acknowledge it happened, Park continued. "They said it was not their concern. Some of them laughed at our grief." The Admiral's voice remained calm, but something hard flickered in his eyes. "We remember all 3 lists," he said simply, "and we will remember who stood where when the Accords were tested." Understood. Humanity would be watching, humanity would be remembering, and humanity would act according to those memories. The memorial dedication at Nu took place 3 months later. The colony had been rebuilt on a continent far from the original settlements. New cities rose where ashes had fallen. New children played in parks that had been designed to help them forget. But some things should never be forgotten. The memorial was a wall of black stone, 3 kilometers long. 2 million names were carved into its surface, each one illuminated by a small light that would burn forever. The names of the children were grouped together at the center, where visitors could see them first. Dr. Shin stood before the wall, surrounded by the 43 survivors she had saved. They were no longer silent. Time and therapy had given them back their voices, but they still gathered around her as they always would. "They thought our kindness was weakness," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd of thousands. "They thought our patience was fear. They thought we would accept any humiliation because we were too soft to fight back." She turned to face the memorial, the names of the dead reflected in her eyes. "They learned." Ambassador stood at her office on the orbital station above Earth. Through the window she could see the planet turning slowly below. Blue oceans, green continents, cities that sparkled with light. 8 billion people going about their lives, safe for now. A young aide entered with reports from the assembly. Trade agreements were being renegotiated. 3 species had applied to join the Mutual Defense Pact. The ambassador, who had once called humans trained pets, had been removed from his position. "Ambassador," the aide asked, "now that the accords are in place, will we return to our old approach? The smiles, the patience, the accommodation." Looked at her reflection in the glass. The woman who looked back was not the same one who had stood at diplomatic receptions, swallowing insults for the sake of peace. That woman was gone. She had died at with everyone else. But something new had taken her place. Something that could smile and negotiate and build friendships across species lines. Something that could also command 3,000 warships and bring an empire to its knees. "We were always capable of both," she said quietly. "That was our secret. The kindness was real. The patience was real. The desire for peace was genuine." She turned to face the aide, and her eyes were as cold and deep as space itself. But so was everything else. The strength we hid, the preparations we made, the willingness to do what was necessary when necessity demanded. The aide nodded slowly, understanding. "Now they know," Ambassador continued. "They know that humanity can be the best friend the galaxy has ever had, or the worst enemy it could possibly imagine. The choice was always theirs. It still is." She turned back to the window, watching Earth turn in the endless dark. "We stopped being polite. We never stopped being kind. They will learn the difference eventually." Below her, the world turned. Above her, the stars waited. And across the galaxy, 100 species looked at humanity with new eyes, finally understanding what they had always been. Patient, generous, forgiving. And absolutely, terrifyingly capable of burning worlds. They had been warned, now they believed it. And the galaxy would never be the same.